So I want to talk a little bit here about simplifying our subjects and through the use of value studies. This is a very common type of a scene that people like to choose. It's very busy. I know street scenes are really popular with students, but in particular, when you're dealing with something like this, it's really difficult to look through beyond all the little details in this scene and find a way to simplify and harmonize these things. And my value study process is all about trying to initially kind of paint this scene as a series of just three layers or three value layers, basically, where I'm using the white of the paper to represent all the lights. And then I come up with one big middle value connected shape to simplify everything. Like I said, all those objects are now into one shape. And I know this is kind of a finished value study, obviously, where the darks are placed on top. But before I put all those darks in, the windows and everything, it was just one big, simple middle value shape. All right. That's really important. If your painting is just a collection of separated individual shapes, it's very chaotic. Okay, the viewer doesn't really get a sense of where you want to lead them. And for the most part, when you have figures in your scenes like this, they become kind of an area of interest or a focal area. But if you start putting in all these white shutters and worrying about that, and painting the tree super realistically in every little balcony and trying to get all that information on there, pretty soon the viewer doesn't know where you want them to look. Okay, so this allows me a chance to practice and simplifying the scene before I go and do it in color. And another thing I tell my students all the time is what you leave out of your painting is as important as what you put in. Okay, there's some shapes that are important that you need to make sure that the viewer is clear on what it is they're looking at. But there's a lot of information that you can just suggest or leave out entirely, and their brains will fill in the rest.
If you like what Andy Evanson shows you in this video, we would like to invite you to his exclusive online marathon, Watercolor Landscape Mastery, Theory and Practice. It's absolutely free to register. If you face challenges with specific elements in landscape painting such as skies, water, trees, or figures, this marathon is designed to provide you with the guidance and valuable insights you need to bring your landscapes to new heights. By joining this marathon, you can practice Andy's techniques and gain a solid understanding of the basic steps involved in creating a watercolor landscape painting. Plus, when you register, you'll receive a free PDF guide titled Top 7 Tips for Finding Inspiration, a guide for artists. To join is very easy. Just click the link in the upper right corner of this video. This will direct you to the overview page. You can also find the link in the description to this video. See you at the marathon.
So that's just one example there. Here's another example of a scene, very colorful scene, kind of a chaotic scene here. Where would you even start? If you were going to paint this as a color painting, you're going to just start worrying about the horse right away and drawing that and not finding a way to connect it through values. So it's really important, I think, to take color out of the equation and look at things as a series of values. Going back to that slide that Hannah showed about all the problems, so many of them come back to this solution, this value study. Overworking your painting because you didn't have a plan, lack of a composition, that's that big connected shape. Finding an area of interest, that also comes from that. The negative painting that's involved with it that you have to worry about. Just doing a painted value study allows you to practice creating the horse. I'm not painting the horse, I'm creating the back of that horse by painting the darker shape of the building behind it. So by painting these value studies, it's a really nice warm up, and the whole figure there, that wasn't created until I painted the dark of the doorway behind the figure and left that middle value and a little bit of light on her arm behind. So it's a little bit unnerving. It takes some practice because a lot of times, it doesn't all come together until the end when you put your darks on. But I think it's important to keep practicing all those things. And there's not always just one I kind of resist the term focal point. I don't like that. Just with the point, it just kind of suggests that there's one tiny little area in your painting that's important and the rest isn't. I like to use the term areas of interest. And in general, most scenes, you're going to have multiple areas of interest. If you're doing a landscape, it's not just about one thing. It's how it all ties together, the harmony of that whole scene. And then you try and, through the use of contrast and color or what have you, try and lead the viewer's eye to a couple of little points that might be more important. Usually they're in the foreground, but not always. So again, finding a way to connect all these little separate bits that are out there, and through a use of a value plan. Sometimes they're bigger shapes, sometimes it's as small as fencing, but at least it's still connected, and it kind of provides a nice uninterrupted path for the viewer's eye through your painting, and they just go from one shape to the next to the next. And because of that connection, that connectivity of the value study, and then trying to duplicate that in the color painting, so that they're not just seeing this herky-jerky collection of shapes that have nothing to unify them. They don't know where they're supposed to look, and that happens a lot with all the white edges and gaps between shapes that students usually end up with, because they're worried about just painting that and then going over there and painting that and then painting that. So again, just finding a way to add some harmony, simplify your composition, all of that is really, really important. I do these kinds of exercises a lot with my students in workshops where we work through it, both as a value study and a color plan. And again, just kind of finding a way to simplify things. And a lot of times they're starting to grasp the concept of the value study fairly quickly, but then when they go to color, just because they're working in color, they want to spend 10 times the amount of time on it and just make it that much better. And I keep telling them, if it looks that clear as a value study, don't reinvent the wheel, don't get really tight with things. But it's amazing how often they revert right back to the old habits of, just because color's in the equation now, they start separating everything. So really trying to get them to follow that same plan of attack. Like I said, when you're looking at that value study one here, those practicing those little shapes, I'm not really painting cows, I'm just suggesting cows to the viewer. All right, but that's typically what people see. If I zoomed in on any one of those little bits, you're not going to see a cow, but so much of it is the context of the scene, because they're sitting by a barn. You're just going to assume that they're cows, and then those little dashes of black and brown paint and leaving the white behind. Again, that's just you're trusting the viewer's mind to fill in the blanks. And if you want to paint loosely, that's very important. Going back to what I said earlier, what you leave out of a painting is as important as what you put in. So I prefer to find, areas of interest in my painting. It's not always about, I get asked that a lot when I'm painting, what's your focal point? Sometimes it is rather obvious, but more often than not, I like the barn. I like the shadow on the barn. I like the cows, obviously. It was fun to create the dirt pasture that they're on, and all those kinds of things. So I'd rather have the viewer kind of travel through the painting than just hone in on one small little object. And again, going back to that painting, I have that painting here with me. There's multiple things happening in there. It's all, I want the viewer to notice it all. Okay, I want them to notice the light on the little strip of land. I want them to notice that beautiful dappled shadow on the rock, and the girl swinging on the rope and her reflection, and this little guy wading out in the water with his dog, his little buddy, and then the boats in the background just suggested. Okay, so again, it's not always just one thing, but when you can find that harmony, the lost edges, the dappled shadow on the ground just kind of merges right up into the rock, and that merges right into the green, painting it around the light part of the rock going in, that merges with the reflection of the boy. So your eye just travels from one shape to the next to the next. So even if you do have multiple areas of interest, there's still harmony, there's still connectivity, and it's not it's not all too broken up. That's very important. And just another one here. Going back to that whole concept of, it's not what you paint, it's how you paint it. Springtime in Minnesota when all the snow was melting, a fairly nondescript house. Okay, just down the neighborhood taking the dog for a walk, but I just loved all the patterns of light and shadow and reflections when I came upon this scene. It just was just really exciting to me when as soon as I saw that, and the way the strong sun, this blue house, the sun was so strong, it's bleaching out, the light on the blue from one side of the house, the way it's hitting it. And then over towards the shadow area, you're seeing more of the blue. But again, the eye can travel through the dirt, the reflection of the trees down in here into the shadows on the snow, more shadows across there, shadows up on here into the tree itself. And it just kind of travels through the painting when you find a way to do that. The colors are fairly, consistent. There's a lot of cool blues and greens and things in here. The one little red fire hydrant is really the only splash of color that's different from that overriding, harmonious color theme. But yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. And on an example like this here, and I'll the practical part of this later on, I'll do a little painting, but I just want to talk about this a little bit. Another example very similar to the one that I showed you of the flower garden or the flower market in France with the lady walking. This is a very complicated scene. Okay, there's a lot going on. How do you simplify that? And typically I just kind of painted this on my own. It's a little cartoonish, but again, the student is going to look at this and see them as a series of individual shapes. And I see this kind of thing over and over and over again, where the objects are not connected. They all have white paper between them. God forbid, the building actually touches the car, or the two figures touch each other. They are touching each other in that scene, but over and over again, I see this kind of a thing where you're leaving white paper on them. Okay, and not painting through shapes that are darker. There's no reason to paint around a dark lamppost like that. You just paint through it. But again, I see that all the time. There's a dark tree in front of light grass, and they'll paint the grass and they stop before they get to the tree, even though the tree is going to be much darker on top later. And then we tend to see color in very simplistic ways. If you're not considering value and you're just thinking about color and those objects, that whole big shape of the buildings in the background, you're going to see is a collection of a tan building, a pink building, an orange building, a brown building, a red building, a yellow building, a green building. And if you're concentrating on that in your mind's eye, you're not going to connect those shapes. You're going to just see all those little white gaps again, showing their ugly head and making things separated. And that's what I was saying before. When you paint like that, you don't find connections. It's a series of individual shapes that looks just very chaotic to the viewer. All right, so we've got to find a way to get past that hurdle in our work, and concentrating on values is the biggest way.